Good afternoon. My name is Kyle Roberts, and I'm the Associate Director of Library and Museum Programming at the American Philosophical Society. Welcome to the third day of the APS's virtual symposium, The Promise and Pitfalls of Citizen Science. I'm glad that so many of you have been able to join us today. The American Philosophical Society resides in Lenape-Hoking, the homeland of the Lenape people, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. The APS acknowledges with respect their continued presence and perseverance and expresses its sincere thanks for the past and ongoing generosity of numerous Indigenous communities and individuals who've offered their guidance, their expertise, and opportunities for collaboration. This week's conference is inspired by the Society's 2021 exhibition, Dr. Franklin, Citizen Scientist, and it expands on the exhibition's themes by exploring understandings of citizen science over time, placing historical initiatives in conversation with present-day projects, as well as reflecting on the future needs and opportunities of the movement. Now, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, the American Philosophical Society was founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1743. The Society is a catalyst for the discovery of new knowledge. Election to membership honors those who've made exceptionally significant contributions to science, the arts and humanities, and public life. The Society promotes research by providing over $1 million in research grants a year, primarily to younger scholars who need the support the most. Our library, museum collections, and research centers serve scholars and visitors from across the globe. Please check out our website, amphilsoc.org, and we'll put that link in the chat box to learn more about what we do and for news of forthcoming events. We are using Zoom webinar today, so not to worry, you've all been muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom center of your navigation bar. You might want to locate it now. Now, you can type a question in there at any time during the presentation. We're going to leave some time at the end of the panel for questions with our speakers. We also encourage you to keep the conversation going on the APS's social media using the hashtag #CitSciAPS. You can see that on the slide, and we'll also put that in the chat box. Finally, we are excited to offer closed captioning for this conference. If you'd like to use it during the panel, please click on the CC box, again, on that bottom navigation bar of Zoom. It's to the right of the Q&A button. So with all that housekeeping out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce the speakers participating in today's showcase on the Environmental Justice Academy, Strategies for Scientific Inquiry, Knowledge Production, and Citizen Empowerment. We have 5 speakers from the project with us today. I'm going to introduce all 5 speakers, so that way they can give their presentation without me interrupting. At the end of their presentation, we'll come back out for a question and answer. Dr. Dana Williamson is a behavioral scientist who earned her PhD from Emory University, Rollins School of Public Health. She has diverse public health experience that spans 18 years of applied community-engaged research, outreach, and development. She's worked as a health communications specialist with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and as a project director implementing multiple NIH-funded culturally sensitive interventions. Her research has maintained a core theme of a health disparities lens, really crucial in addressing key questions about society, inequities, health consequences, and lack of resources. Currently, Dr. Williamson is an Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health Environmental Health Fellow at the Environmental Protection Agency, leading program evaluation efforts of the Scientific Integrity Program in the Office of Science Advisor, Policy and Engagement. Our second speaker is Cheryl Goode. Ms. Goode received her bachelor's degree in physics from Benedict College, a master's degree in physics from Clark Atlanta University, and a master's degree in urban policy studies from Georgia State University. Currently, Ms. Goode is employed with the Environmental Protection Agency in Atlanta, Georgia, as an environmental scientist in the Office of Environmental Justice and Sustainability. There, she is the program manager for the Environmental Justice Academy, which, as you're going to hear soon, is a 9-month leadership development program for community-based leaders in environmental justice communities. She's also served as the Regional Diversity Manager for the EPA Region 4 for a 1-year detail assignment. Our third speaker is Dr. Joan Marshall Wesley, an associate professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Jackson State University, Jackson, Mississippi, where she teaches planning theory and courses in community development and housing. Her work emphasizes the intersection of stakeholder empowerment and community-based participatory research to promote healthy and sustainable communities. Dr. Wesley has published individually and collaboratively in many journals and collected volumes of essays. Her non-academic work covers 30 years of diverse administrative, executive, managerial, and consulting experience in private, nonprofit, and public sectors. Dr. Wesley is a graduate of the 2015-2016 inaugural Environmental Justice Academy as well. Omar Mohammed is from Augusta, Georgia, where he earned his biology degree from Augusta State University and is currently pursuing a master's degree in community and urban planning with a policy focus at the College of Charleston. Mr. Mohammed works for the Department of Natural Resources as a fisheries biologist. He has worked as a community advocate and activist since 2007 as a volunteer for the Low Country Alliance for Model Communities. He has served that organization as a website content coordinator, community engagement liaison, and most recently as its executive director. Mr. Mohammed has successfully funded community research initiatives to train residents, conducted community-based health survey to assess health service gaps at the community level, and conducted a zoning analysis for environmental justice communities and several other citizen science projects. And he, along with Dr. Wesley, is also a graduate of the Academy. And our fifth speaker is Daphne Wilson. Daphne Wilson is a mechanical engineer with over 30 years of experience. Her professional career began in Marysville, Ohio at Honda of America Manufacturing as a project manager for the East Liberty plant startup. She later transitioned to environmental engineering after accepting positions at the Georgia Department of Natural Resources in the Hazardous Waste Program and with the Jefferson County, Kentucky Air Pollution Control District. Ms. Wilson has worked at the EPA Region 4 for 20 years, and she currently works in the Environmental Justice and Children's Health section, where she serves as a pollution prevention coordinator, environmental justice grants coordinator, and environmental justice technical staff. So we have a lot of expertise on our panel today. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to our speakers.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the American Philosophical Society for hosting us today, for allowing us to share our panel discussion with you that is entitled The Environmental Justice Academy, Strategies for Scientific Inquiry, Knowledge Production, and Citizen Empowerment. So just giving you a brief overview of our discussion today and presentation. The historical overview of environmental justice will be shared by Daphne Wilson. In addition, we'll follow up with collaborative strategies for just place-based disparities in the EJ Academy curriculum with Cheryl Goode, knowledge production and citizen empowerment will then be the next item shared. The next discussion point will be project excellence, and then followed by the EJ Academy evaluation, outcomes, and next steps. So, Daphne.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. The environmental justice movement was started primarily by people of color who wanted to address inequities in environmental protection in their communities. The civil rights movement sounded the alarm about public health dangers for these people, their families, and their communities. The Memphis sanitation strike was the first time African Americans mobilized nationally to oppose what they considered environmental injustices. Dr. King investigated and advocated for better working conditions for the sanitation workers. And this event is unfortunately where he met his death. The second time that that environmental justice, the second time was the sit-in against the PCB landfill in Warren County, North Carolina. So in this event, there were more than 500 activists that were arrested. The protest was not successful in stopping the landfill, but this event was considered to be the catalyst for the environmental justice movement. After the Warren County event, the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice published a study linking race and hazardous waste sightings. This was the first of its kind, and it addressed race, class, and environment on a national level. It was determined that although socioeconomic status was considered, it played a role in the site determinations, race was the most significant factor. Okay, so the federal government began addressing EJ in the 90s. After the executive order 12898 was signed in 1994, EJ offices were established in EPA, Department of Justice, and other federal agencies. There's other events that occurred. And then in 2007, there was a study done, Toxic Waste and Race, which actually is a 20-year reflection on the study that was done by the United Church of Christ. And what it discovered was that hazardous waste sightings were more concentrated then, 20 years later, than when in 1987, when the original study was done. In 2015, EJ Screen was released. And in 2016, we graduated our first Environmental Justice Academy class with Joan and Omar. So that kind of brings us up to today that President Biden has signed Executive Order 14008, and it addresses environmental justice. It's titled Climate Justice at Home and Abroad, but there's a component in there that focuses on environmental justice. So this brings us to today, March of 2021. We have a new administration and a new EJ focus. So President Biden's administration is making EJ a priority. And we have a newly confirmed administrator, Michael Reagan, who happens to be from North Carolina, about an hour or so from the site of the Warren County protest, which was the catalyst for this whole movement. Also, we have the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council was recently established, and it has hosted its first public meeting. And the people that are on this council were selected, and they are basically the groundbreaking, people that have done significant things in the environmental justice movement.
All right, thank you, Daphne. So now I'm going to talk about collaborative strategies to address place-based disparities and the Environmental Justice Academy curriculum. So in Daphne's presentation, she mentioned the inaugural class of the Environmental Justice Academy started in 2015. And she also referenced 2004, which was the date that the collaborative problem-solving model was established. So you see here, there's a diagram of the 7 elements in the collaborative problem-solving model. And we're referencing this here today in this presentation because it serves as the foundation for the Environmental Justice Academy. Daphne and I co-created this beginning 2013, actually, as a response to some needs that we saw from community-based leaders across the Southeast who were in the trenches working to try to resolve their concerns, the environmental and public health concerns, but needed some additional capacity in order to be able to do so effectively and efficiently. And so we knew about this collaborative problem-solving process, which was penned after a community-based person who we were, similar to others that we were trying to assist out of Spartanburg, South Carolina. And it was determined that the process that he followed over a period of several years was this collaborative problem-solving model as we see it today. So I'm going to speak in the following slides about how this CPS model references to our Environmental Justice Academy, or how it correlates to our Environmental Justice Academy. Okay, so the first element for the collaborative problem-solving model focuses on the issue identification, a community vision, and strategic goal setting. So in this first element, the participants in the EJ Academy are asked to put together a 120-day action plan, which in it includes SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. They learn about Environmental Justice Screen, which is a mapping tool. It helps them to pull together a historical and a comprehensive environmental, demographic, compliance history, perspective of their community, and they establish vision and mission statements. The second element talks about community capacity building and leadership development. So I mentioned earlier that one of the main reasons why we established this academy was to develop leaders, or to assist leaders in developing and molding their skills. So we teach them during this particular module on emotional intelligence, which they learn about how to deal with other people that they're working with internally and externally. They learn about appreciative inquiry, which is another foundational component of the academy. It teaches them how to focus on what's happening that's positive or what's working well, and then to do more of that, as opposed to focusing on the negative aspects of their community. Then they learn about their respective leadership style and how they can utilize that to work best with others. And then they utilize some sustainable communities model. The third element focuses on consensus building and dispute resolution, which, as you can imagine, is quite prominent in communities that are full of concerns that potentially cause health impacts or even more fatal impacts. And so there's a lot of emotions that you see within these environmental justice communities. So this particular element focuses on learning about mediation, using different mediation and alternative dispute resolution styles. There's a World Cafe method, which is an alternative to a traditional public meeting setting. using interest-based negotiation, learning how to work collaboratively and making sure that you hold local elected officials accountable by contacting them. The fourth element and the fifth one kind of work hand in hand because they focus on stakeholder development and constructive engagement of those stakeholders. So within one organization, or no one organization has, everything. And you always need to look to other people or other organizations to partner with you, to engage in some of your other activities. So these two exercises focus on identifying the partners and the additional resources that you need, and then trying to figure out what would be the most effective way to work with those partners. Specifically in that fifth element, there's a couple of exercises within the EJ Academy that allows them to really define their stakeholder engagement and to go through an exercise that assesses their organization in terms of their leadership and other elements. The sixth element focuses on sound management and implementation, very important. You look at your project management, you work on a logic model that walks you through, defining short-term, mid-term, long-term outcomes, outputs, looking at budgets. All those things are involved in effective project management. And then we also incorporated an exercise, very important, to do or get some experience or some practice. We're doing a 2-minute pitch to potential funders who might be able to invest in their projects. The seventh and the final element focuses on evaluating the program, looking at your lessons learned or documenting lessons learned, and replicating best practices. This is equally important. I'm saying all of these elements are important. This one is equally important because you have to go back and evaluate your program, assess if it was successful or if it's something that you need to scrap or they need to scrap. This also focuses on more data collection tools, resource methodologies, and other mapping tools, perhaps. And then one of the cornerstones of the Environmental Justice Academy is the development of a portfolio, which encompasses assignments from throughout the academy, and it ends up being a part of the project, the final project demonstration. So this actually just goes over the 7 elements of the CPS model.
So thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate that. For the next few minutes, I'll discuss and provide at least one example of how I've been able to integrate lessons learned in the Environmental Justice Academy and apply them to my planning courses in ways that benefit the communities in which I work. Ultimately, the application of these lessons resulted in co-production of knowledge with communities concomitant with citizen empowerment. As a planner, of course, I'm involved in various concerns surrounding zoning and land use, both of which have often had a disproportionately adverse impact upon minority and low wealth communities. This has resulted often in environmental injustice. Creating and strengthening university community collaborations or partnerships allows me opportunities to promote community-based participatory research through application and reinforcement of lessons learned. And I'm going to skip a little bit down and say, we look at learning, using, and transferring technology as well as knowledge. And then especially important for us is knowledge co-production. And then of course, we're always looking for creating and developing citizen scientists to continue the ongoing research within our communities. As an extension to aligning the Environmental Justice Academy and planning curricula, my students, community stakeholders, and I have experienced various levels of success in knowledge co-production through reciprocal learning. So if you look at the schemata here, we begin with looking at the university community partnerships that I work very closely and very diligently to develop. The next line, the middle line, looks at community and the university as it relates to classroom participants, that would be students, and the reciprocal learning. That's why we have the two-way arrow going between community and then university with the classroom participants. And then of course, at the bottom line here, we hope that what comes out of that, and almost always it does, or some degree of it, we'll look at being able to do project design and development. Of course, there's a lot of data collection that goes on throughout the process. And of course, we're always looking for outcomes and how we assess those outcomes. So community-based participatory research connects university resources with community needs. In order to make this happen, we first have to establish a relationship with the community. This is where the EJ Academy CPS model really comes in handy. And so we try to establish relationship with the community. This requires a variety of skills, both professional as well as interpersonal. Once relationships are established, and they have to be nurtured, communities then become more empowered to pursue self-direction by engaging in collaborative research with planning classes, where they perform a variety of community-based participatory research tasks, which may include everything from identifying and responding to community needs, looking at community profiles and assessing those profiles, all the way to the last bullet point that I have listed, which is mapping. And this is collaborative at inception in order to determine human, social, physical, financial, as well as political capital throughout the community. And so the schemata on the left has CBPR, which is community-based participatory research, right in the center. And all of the pieces that surround it are elements that go into community-based participatory research. A point of particular pride is when community members engage in CBPR and learn skills that they can apply to scientific inquiry. That is, they become citizen scientists in their own right. Skill levels and experience and expertise required will vary, but typically they will nonetheless acquire specific knowledge and skills that will allow them to engage substantively in identifying and researching issues important to their communities. These may include things such as health risk mapping, water and soil samples, looking at radon test kits, and they can also share this knowledge or transfer this knowledge to other community members. They look at GIS, that is Geographic Information Systems. They learn to review and conduct research, looking at the toxic release inventory reports, and then EJ Screen, which is a mapping and screening tool that Sheryl mentioned earlier, which is extremely vital to the work that they do. And so I'm going to talk a little bit now or share with you an example of how we apply knowledge by illuminating our work through specific projects. I'm going to talk about one that I've worked with, and then afterwards I'll turn it over to my colleague. So the project that I want to talk about for a minute or so is Community Engaged Scholarship, Amethyst at 5 Points. This is the name of the project. And so what we have underneath that title is to show that the Environmental Justice Academy continues to resonate and produce outcomes through our EJ Academy graduates who are then engaged in communities of learning and practice. And so engaged scholarship, Amethyst at 5 Point, actually engages our students in scholarship and is defined by Ernest, who really kind of pioneered this work. Engaged scholarship is a research strategy that consists of 4 fundamental activities: problem formation, theory building, research design, and problem solving. So the project here was conducted in the fall of 2020 with a local community in Jackson, Mississippi. It revolves around 8.5 acres that were donated to a neighborhood association. And then, of course, there are 4 communities involved with it. And so they're all engaged in the project at this point. The one thing I want to point out before I move on is that in the center part of this slide, you will see there's an aerial view of the 8.5 acres. This information was actually captured by one of our citizen scientists who used a robot who used a drone to survey the area, and he put his entire activity on YouTube. And so I'm going to end with that and turn it over to my colleague, Omar.
Thank you, Joan. Appreciate it. Just like Joan, I am a graduate of the Environmental Justice Academy inaugural class, and I will be making a presentation on how our community used the information that we obtained in the Academy for a project called Project Excellence. And the mission of Project Excellence is to promote environmental awareness, literacy, and empower the community. One of the goals is to increase community capacity to address local environmental concerns at the neighborhood level. And we focus on capacity building, education and outreach, pipeline development, and training in the community around community science. Next slide, please. This first project and each one of the projects after each, on these slides build on each other, the skill sets. So the participants during the summer participated in an enrichment program in 2010, where students developed, was introduced to citizen science as well as careers in citizen science. So they participated in workshops around public health, GIS mapping. They visited one of the marine laboratories, Holland's Marine Laboratory, and they also had the opportunity to present their papers and their research topics during the summer as well. Next slide, please. And the second citizen science program that we developed was the Environmental Justice Service Learning course. So this happened in fall of 2010. The students that participated in that learned about environmental justice and health concerns. The students also developed workshop materials and toolkits about the different environmental concerns in their communities. Next slide, please. Building on that, the community environmental health education workshops, which the students identified which issues were of concern to theirs, and develop workshops and toolkits and other type of material. They had the opportunity also to co-teach those classes. Here are some pictures here of those students with Dr. Paget in a field exercise, learning how to apply GIS techniques and mapping techniques in their communities. And then they were brought into the classroom and actually learned how to use the data collected in the field to develop a map. The next program is a community environmental health education workshop in the spring of 2011. This was a one-day workshop held on air pollution monitoring and training, where issues around air pollution was discussed, provided an overview of air pollution monitoring, and also the community has had an opportunity to go out and test some of the local air monitor techniques that were used in the community. Next slide, please. I will turn this over to Dana. Thank you, Dana.
Okay, thank you, Omar. So let's get my video up. All right, thank you. So this is a wonderful picture of one of the EJ Academy classes. I believe this was the inaugural class of 2016. And so this next portion, I'll talk through some of the evaluation outcomes and findings of those who participated in the Academy and some of the next steps for what's on the horizon. So findings from our most recent evaluation have identified that the majority of EJ projects were conducted in the southeastern region of the US. EJ Fellows were comprised of a mixture of academic activists, professional community activists, and some were student activists. The majority of projects were related to local pollution and zoning, a focus on local infrastructure and development or environmental stewardship, as well as green infrastructure, sustainability planning, and urban landscapes, such as tree planting, stormwater retention, solar panels, and park revitalization to mitigate community concerns. About 1/3 of projects resulted in partnership development, almost 1/3 resulted in community structural change, and one project succeeded in obtaining policy change. The following are examples of community outcomes relative to policy, systems, and environmental community changes that resulted from projects conducted during the EJ Academy. I won't detail each of these wonderful projects specifically, but I do want to provide you with an understanding of the great impacts of these works. So here I'm referencing PSE change as multiple ways that policy, organizational, structural, and physical environmental levels all can support infrastructure for sustained community engagement and change. With respect to systems change projects, as a result of EJ learnings and newly established partnerships, some were able to acquire seed funding for curriculum development, implement community education, creating solidarity through town hall meetings, expanding the reach with newly established partnerships, as well as overall integrating new thinking into the ways in which environmental inequity concerns could be addressed in particular neighborhoods. Many achieved environmental change from a small scale neighborhood trash pickup to local neighborhood gardens and larger scale agroecology farming methods and models across the community. And from policy perspective, one project was able to implement a small policy win, which I alluded to previously. This was specifically with the installation of a stop sign as the beginning step to reduce tractor trailer traffic in a particular neighborhood and reduce diesel pollution. Above all, the EJ Academy has been able to build community capacity in numerous ways, enhancing the power within communities to tackle environmental injustice. The curriculum specifically speaks to enhancing capacity along these 10 dimensions: citizen participation, enhancing understanding of history with respect to environmental racism and inequities, as well as building community power by encouraging and equipping participants with knowledge to resist and confront their issues, creating a space for shared norms and values, reflecting on strategies, limitations, and successes through critical reflection, instilling leadership, uplifting resources by creating connections and building bridges, building a sense of community, enhancing skills development through training, and lastly, creating a foundation of partnership and networking. The Academy has successfully created a structure for project development and implementation. They have specifically strengthened community efforts by creating greater understanding around networking, partnership, and community engagement. As detailed by one EJ Fellow, the partnership, I feel like I have built a stronger connection with community because I realize that my role is to be a bridge. I can relate as a resident, I can relate as a survivor, I can relate as the person that works at the nonprofit, I can relate that their issues are also my issues. Effective communication was also very helpful in guiding, supporting, and informing EJ advocacy work. As detailed by one participant, learning how to have important conversations with people that always don't see eye to eye with you, learning how to redirect your anger and not always becoming agitated, but changing that conversation or the tone of the conversation to be more productive. And lastly, further, overall leadership development provided greater understanding around most effective and impactful ways to engage with community. As detailed by one participant, life is not always about choosing your team or the people you work with. It's about getting us to work together and achieving whatever our small wins are to get to the big win. So I've just matured to be able to say that I've been more inclusive in my communication and plans and programs moving forward, realizing that, if people are not really engaged and involved, then they really have not bought into it. The CPS model overall provides not only a framework, but a systematic approach for developing local solutions through an emphasis on skills development, strategic thinking, as well as the identification of diverse stakeholders. Participation in the Academy afforded EJ Fellows with a sense of pride and prestige that they were able to leverage in their partnership development. Fellows were also able to build infrastructure for collaboration, as well as partnership, and many garnered skills that were directly shared with their respective communities. And also a select few were able to create the community environmental or structural change that they really desired. And my last slide, just providing an overview, the EJ Academy is really an exemplary program. It's a leadership program that is community-led and community-powered. It is empowering. And also this equity-focused orientation is specifically for EJ advocacy. The EJ Academy continues to foster ongoing communication, ongoing connection, and ongoing commitment to their mission. And this is not only exemplified today through our collaborative panel, but the works continue to be supported through the network of alumni who have graduated from the Academy. And further, there's also ongoing discussions related to the expansion of the EJ Academy for other EPA regions and offices, external organizations, and through colleges and universities. And today, the topic of environmental justice is really top of mind. It's a hot topic for many, but for those who are doing this work and for those who are really involved with the Academy, the environmental justice has been a topic and has been a lived experience for decades. So we today collectively come together, but we also collectively continue our efforts for education as well as exposure to other stakeholders to not only include EJ in their discussions, but actually include EJ and the communities that are impacted through their actions. So thank you so much for your time today. We have allotted just a little bit of time left, and we hope that we can have a fruitful discussion.
That was great. Thank you so much. If I can ask all of our speakers to turn their cameras on. We could probably take down the slides so that everyone can see us in the full. Great, there we are. So for everybody out there in Zoom land watching, if you want to ask a question, go ahead and submit it through the Q&A feature. We've got a bunch of questions here already. We'll see how many of these we can get through. So the first question that came in asked, why did it take so long for the federal government to address the environmental justice issues? Were individual states perhaps more responsive before that? I don't know who wants to take that. Daphne, maybe? Or
Yeah, I'll take that question. And the answer to that is, I don't know. I'm not sure why it took so long for the federal government to step in, but I'm gonna make the assumption that it was because of it wasn't a priority. They tend to take action when things become a priority. And I think that after the Warren County situation and other events that had occurred, Executive Order 12828 was signed by Bill Clinton. So it was in that administration where he began to make it a priority. So I guess that's the best answer I can give personally, is that it wasn't a priority.
I guess we could look to the future, and it seems like the future looks pretty bright from what you were sharing.
Yeah, fortunately, this administration, it has, it is now again a priority, and so there's a renewed focus on environmental justice.
Great. So there's a question that's come in here from Ann Schultz, who thanks you so much for sharing this information. She said she learned a great deal. Her question is, are there any plans for an Environmental Justice Academy for high school students? Or is this mostly sort of community leaders and college age students?
You want me to answer that one?
Sure.
You know, that is a great question, and we've talked about that. You know, Daphne and I were on the team that worked on developing the academy for a couple of years, and we oftentimes talked about incorporating high school students, but we just didn't have the resources to do that. But we recognize that including students at that age would be a great component to include into the program. So I think it's just a matter of time before one of our future host organizations decides to include high school students.
I guess one other thing that I can add is that when we were in the developmental stages, we talked about how another thing that these communities needed was to have a longevity or a succession planning, right? And as part of that, we discussed possibly having them to pair with a youth in order to have someone to continue on their fight.
Right.
But again, like Sheryl said, we just hadn't developed it to that age, to that stage. And that's a really good thing that we should add.
There's another question here, which I think sort of dovetails with that. And it's a question for Joan. Have your students gone on to do environmental justice work as a result of the experiences that you brought to the classes in your own experience in the academy?
I have had some who go on. I think because the work that we do is so broad and the umbrella of environmental justice is so wide. They're engaged in the work at different scales and at different levels. But I've had, I know, even getting involved with some of the seminars and workshops that we have has just kind of, spurred them and really influenced them even further to get involved. But the short answer would be yes. A longer answer would be they are involved. They're involved in different levels. They don't all come from Mississippi, so they go through other places. And some of them are not even in community development and housing. Some are in environment and land use, but they do find that environmental justice is something they hadn't thought necessarily about or had not connected it as closely as they should to social justice. And once they find and understand these linkages, they have become more involved and they do take it into their communities.
One of the things that really struck me, and maybe Dana, this maybe came up in your evaluation, what the beauty of the system you created is there's so many transferable skills in this model, right? That this it doesn't feel narrowly focused on one certain type of justice work, right? It feels like that you've really deliberately thought about a system, a structure that works more broadly. Was that sort of the intention, or is that just a sort of benefit that's come from good thinking?
Definitely, that was the intention.
And I would say from my evaluation lens, I specifically felt like the academy was, not only leadership development, but truly building on capacity. And if a community doesn't have the capacity of all those 10 dimensions that I detailed, then they may not be able to specifically, or maybe identifying what the issue is, but also having the resources and the skills and the networks and the partnerships to be able to move forward. And so, as I had detailed, I really feel like the academy is building the capacity of your regular everyday person who is experiencing some level of disparity, some level of injustice, and empowering them or allowing them to find the power within to really identify and move forward and really execute a plan with how they can go about engaging with other folks to alleviate their level of injustice that they're experiencing.
Great. There's a question here from Richard Johnson. Maybe, Omar, this would be a good one for you to tackle as an executive director of a community-based organization. What are some of the strategies to get people in communities to start talking about issues? You know, is that how has your training with the EGA really maybe helped you? And what are some things that we can take away from this conversation, maybe to even get conversations started?
Yeah, I mean, some of the strategies is looking at ways in which you could walk away with consensus. So consensus building, working across your differences. A lot of times, you know, communities, particularly environmental justice communities, they're in the mode of always fighting, resisting, opposing. And one of the things that I could say I learned and valued, it was many of them, but this is one, in the Environmental Justice Academy, is the appreciative inquiry process. Looking at a situation that is negative and looking for the positives. So that's one strategy that we implement a lot in the discussions we have with communities, looking for a positive, looking for a win-win in very difficult situations. So starting with looking at where you can work together and build consensus, build alliances, build collaborations.
Great. I'm curious, you know, if we think over the sort of time period, do you find that the communities you're working with are more receptive now than they were 5 years, 10 years, or is there still just sort of that you have to do the good work to sort of get people to come together?
I think one of the things that have really helped our organization is that we built trust in the community. Mm-hmm. And trust building and relationship building has been one of those key strategies. Like I said before, many communities, right? It's just not environmental justice communities, but it's disproportionately impacted communities, low wealth communities, have been promised things that will improve their quality of life. And a lot of times those strategies or those plans never come into fruition, right? So one of the things that we really hang our hat on as an organization is that we build trust in the community. We never overpromise. We underpromise and overdeliver, right? So that the community see tangible things happening in the community. They see that issues and concerns that they identify are issues and concerns that we identify, right? So each organization has their own agenda that they bring to the table, but ultimately what we have to address is the issues and concerns that the community values and they see as issues and concerns of theirs. So I think that has been something that we've been successful with. That's
great. There's a question here about evaluation. So maybe Dana or Joan, this would be a good one for you. Was evaluation always an expected part of this work? If so, is there a specific reason why a summative evaluation was utilized instead of a developmental evaluation?
I was going to say, I can just speak specifically to the community, but I think you can speak more broadly to the work that you've actually been engaged in. In terms of community, we evaluate, when we're involved in projects, we do interim evaluations just to see whether or not we're actually accomplishing the things that we've set out to do and whether or not we need to make some adjustments before continuing forward. Specifically as it relates to the EJ Academy, I think Dana is in a better position to respond to that.
So the evaluation that I conducted was summative. It was after all of the EJ fellows, which I'm referring to, which are participants, had gone through the academy, had applied the curriculum, and the specific modules to the work with their projects in their communities. And so my evaluation was to look at the utility of the CPS model in building capacity, in allowing a particular community member to be able to identify and address whatever injustice they were experiencing. And I was also looking to see at the broader outcomes as a result of participation in the academy, what were the policy systems or environmental change that the EJ fellows experienced. And if I'm not sure if there was any formative evaluation. That would probably be a question for Daphne or Sheryl.
So I think, so Dana came on board, like she mentioned, after the graduations.
Yep.
So the evaluations that we conducted throughout each class was more about, did you like your speaker? You know, it wasn't really an evaluation, a programmatic type of evaluation. I guess we just didn't think about that. So I think in the future, we've already started talking about doing more of the type of evaluation that was mentioned in the question.
Can I add to that? As a participant, I think, and Joan may be able to add to this too. I think the community profiles, the profile booklet that we develop at the end based on all the completion of the assignments of all the modules, I think that is a good evaluation too. How well productive was that community profile that we developed through the modules. So I think a lot of us walked away with a valuable document that allowed us to go after grants, allowed us to better describe our communities, better describe the challenges that we had, being able to identify potential partners and how we go about developing stakeholder engagement. So I think that community profile that was developed out of that program, the Academy, it was an evaluation tool.
I
also
agree.
just
Okay. Okay.
Go
Yeah,
ahead, Cheryl.
it's a little different, but I agree with Omar, and I've used that in Insurmountable a lot of times, even with when we go into communities with our students. We often start with developing a community profile, which is a kind of assessment to get started on. Once we've developed that relationship where we can move forward, that's one of the first things they like to do, or that's one of the first things we need to do. And that can be a very massive project, especially for students working collaboratively with the community. But I would say also that was an excellent tool that we got from the Academy, and I use it all the time. And Dana, I think you were going to say something that was a little bit different.
Sure. So really quick, also, I'm a behavioral scientist. And so I come to this work from a different perspective, and I have a different skill set and a different lens. And so my skill set allows me to be able to do the type of evaluation that I conducted. However, I would say that there's a diverse set of experiences as well as expertise broadly at EPA, but it may not be public health behavioral scientists per se. And so this is work that maybe planners or your basic scientists may not have. And so that may not have been a particular key focus when the Academy was developed. But again, because of my skill set, I'm able to lend that the ability to do the evaluation that was conducted.
That's great. So we have a question here from Bob Hauser, who's the CEO of the American Philosophical Society. And he writes, I'm reminded of the fact that Barack Obama was a community organizer before he became a senator and president. I wonder if you might comment on the role of earlier community organization initiatives and practices and what they've played in the development of the EJA Academy. So, maybe inspiration that came from earlier community organization efforts, as well as the ways in which your work has now affected further community initiatives in other areas of concern.
So I think as a participant, I would like to kind of take a stab at that question. I know early on, and Sheryl and Daphne and Denise, Tennessee, you all can resonate with what I'm about to say. Community organizations usually do not have the capacity. And like I said before, we're in the mode of fighting and resisting and being in opposition, right? So we as community grassroots organizations, we don't come necessarily with the skill sets to be able to negotiate very difficult conversations, to navigate government kind of organization structures. So being able to go through the Academy taught us some valuable skills to be able to negotiate, to be able to look at win-win situations and very difficult issues and concerns that are facing communities. And also looking at strategies that have long-term impacts in communities. And I can say that Cheryl and Denise, Tennessee had to pull my coattail a couple of times, right? Because we were fighting with a very powerful entity. I'm not going to say who it is, but it had gotten to the point where our relationship was it was to the point where we were ready to file a administrative complaint against that entity, and EPA stepped in, and they helped us to navigate that process through dispute resolution, right? Appreciative inquiry, and that allowed us to repair that relationship. And because of that, now our organization and that entity is working towards building a community recreation center that is needed in our community. We have been able to work with them on developing a community benefits agreement between a developer and the community. So it has improved relationships between our organization and that entity that has allowed us to continue to work together to improve the quality of life of our residents.
Sorry about that, I'm muted. That was fantastic. So we've kept you sharing all of this information with us for over an hour now. I want to ask one last question here, because I think it would be remiss without doing so. So one of our attendees writes, "Sign me up. How can someone get involved with the EJA?" So how do we, do you have to be nominated to participate? Can you apply? How does one learn from you all?
Cheryl, you're on mute. Okay.
Yeah.
So there are various ways that you can become involved if you're a part of an organization who may be interested in hosting an Environmental Justice Academy. You can initiate that. If you are in a specific region, wherever your region is, you can contact us and maybe see if there's an opportunity coming for an EJ Academy in that region. We're currently working with a couple of other regions and a couple of external people who are interested in hosting their own EJ Academies, but there's an application process. Okay. So once they get to that point, there's an application process and they send out information regarding how to apply. There's specific criteria and you can be selected that way.
Oh, that sounds great. Is there a EJA website that we can send around to people who are watching today to learn more information? Is that the best way to find out, or?
Not at this time, okay. Unless you're in Region 5.
Okay.
But I would say the best way at this time would be just to contact Sheryl or myself, and we would see if we can connect that person with a known entity that is doing an academy.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for sharing this all with us today. Get a virtual round of applause from our attendees. This is the last session of the conference for today. I hope everyone will come back and join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. when we continue. And our subject will be global perspectives on citizen science. Thank you again. See everyone tomorrow.
Thank you.